live stream. Today is April 21st, 2025. I am Washington Monthly Contributing Editor Ann Kim, and I'm joined today by Politics Editor Bill Scher and Editor-in-Chief Paul Glastris. Matt Cooper is out today.
Good
Hi,
morning.
guys.
Hello.
So as you know, we like to pick a theme for every week, and what I'd like to talk about today is whether the Trump presidency has actually reached a tipping point, that we're now past the peak of his power, honeymoon over. I mean, maybe that's wishful thinking, but the past week definitely has seemed pretty disastrous for for the Trump regime. Just yesterday, for example, there were fresh allegations of SignalGate II involving Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and another Signal chat, which apparently this time involved his wife and his little brother, and involving, divulging yet more details about that airstrike in Yemen. And neither of these people is safe to say have security clearance or have any reason to get involved. And that's just one of many things that happened last week. So what do you guys think? Is this the beginning of the end? Paul, I mean, you were pretty early on saying this back in March. Where are you now on this?
Well, I guess I would draw a distinction between his power and his popularity. I think his popularity um, and the kind of sense of competence and moving things in a way that make any kind of sense, that wobbled a month and a half ago, when the Supreme Court started overturning some of his dictates, and when he remember he was going to put major tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and then said I'm going to give them a month and we'll negotiate. And then in early March he said, "Screw it, they haven't given me anything, so I'm putting them on." And then in 12 hours he said, "I'm taking them off." And at that point, the polls of working class Americans were heading south on him because they were concerned about inflation, not, but more concerned about tariffs, and hoping he would do something about inflation, and figuring, the former would hurt the latter. And it's really kind of built since then. But in terms of his power, it feels undiminished, right? And he's
Yeah.
using it, if anything, more ruthlessly. So, the two things are not are not at this point. The one is not hurting the other.
What point do you see a convergence, though, of where power and popularity, collide, or when the power grab becomes so obvious and so ruthless that um, he has to back
You
off on that as
know,
well?
it first of all, I think that the bottom doesn't drop out of his support until the public, and by the public I mean that portion of the public that doesn't pay much of any attention to what happens in Washington, until that
Hmm.
public feels their lives are, substantively disrupted or hurt. Right now, a lot of those people are worried, and the worry about tariffs is really deep. Just ordinary people are sort of bracing for higher prices, but those higher prices haven't come yet. Um, and ordinary people are not getting, you know, able to log on to Social Security's website, and but no checks have not too many checks have failed to arrive. When that kind of stuff hits, then I think it's a real test of his support. But again, it's not like suddenly the Republicans going to impeach him. He's going to be in office,
Right.
as far as I can tell, till the end of his term. But I'm sure Bill has some thoughts about the midterm, because that'll be a check, right?
Oh, well, sure. I definitely think Republicans are on a very bad path in regards to the midterm. Uh, just to get back to the original question about tipping point, is it at a point of no return? Uh, I don't think it doesn't have to be that way. Trump is very erratic, so he could always climb down. He could always, throw in the towel on tariffs, cut some deals, claim a victory, and try to unwind it all. And that might make the economy, chill out, which might help him stem the bleeding. So I don't think he's out of options if you want to operate in a rational way. With not saying I predict it, not saying I expect it, but he has options. I also think that we are potentially seeing some limitations on his power. The Supreme Court said on early Saturday morning, you can't fly a new group of people to El Salvador. And we're about 48 hours after that, I think. And I don't believe he has. He's been very willing to push the envelope on lower court orders. And maybe they want to try to find daylight where they can't even, the Supreme Court said you have to facilitate the return of Garcia from the prison. Well, we offered a plane and the El Salvador didn't take it. We facilitated. Like they'll try to be obtuse and disingenuous where they can. And in this last order, Supreme Court didn't really give them a lot of wiggle room here. They said, don't send these people out. And so far they haven't. So that is an example potentially of the Constitution holding, despite the massive stress tests that it's been under. And if Trump does climb down off of tariffs, that we saw at least a minor pullback on the tariff when the bond market started to freak out. So we saw some reporting that Donald Trump doesn't want 9 on his watch. So there's something that frustrates him, something that concerns him. He might not be concerned about a midterm collapse, might not be concerned about passing the torch to J.D. Vance or Donald Trump Jr., but he doesn't want a Great Depression on his watch. So all these things might suggest that his power is ebbing, or at least is not totally unchecked. But I would stop short of saying it's a tipping point that he can't recover from, because he can still do things to fix the problems that he's created.
Well, I want to ask you, Bill, about Paul's point about popularity versus power. And Bill, I know that you're a big watcher of polls.
Mhm.
And I did see one yesterday from CNBC where Trump has really lost his advantage on the economy with the general public, not Republicans. 55% of Americans now disapprove of his handling of the economy. 49% of the public thinks the economy will get worse, and 57% believes we are now or about to be in a recession. So what's your reading, though? That's, of course, only one of many polls. So what's your reading of the political?
Well, that's the big problem. I mean, he got elected to lower prices, and he hasn't. Not only has he not done anything on that front, he's done the opposite. He's actively tried to raise prices, and the public does not want that. And back to Paul's point about the midterms, Trump might not care. Trump might be very happy to say, "Stay cool. It's all going to work out. Trust me, it's all going to be fantastic." He is not. He does not have the moral authority to convince people of that. Whatever ego he has about his communication skills, and whatever, and I think I've said this on the past podcast, there are other people who have said he's the greatest communicator of our times, the greatest propagandist of our times. That's been true when he's not in office. When he's not in office, he can snooker a lot of people and deflect blame to those in power. When he's in power, both first term and currently, those skills abandon him because the reality on the ground gets in the way. So he is not convincing the public that he's got an economic plan. And if you're a Republican on the ballot in 2026, that concerns you. You have to think twice about hitching your wagon to him. If you had confidence that's all going to work out by 2026, you'd stay the course. I think a lot of these folks don't have that confidence, and they're trying to inch away ever so carefully to not attract the primary challenge, but to have some distance when it comes to the general election in November 2026.
Now, do you guys think that Democrats are taking advantage of the many, many opportunities being presented by this administration to attack it on grounds of incompetence, lawlessness, whatever? We had Chris Van Hollen going down to Maryland to meet with Mr. Garcia and appeal for his return to the United States. Is it working? Are these tactics, are these strategies working? Are people, maybe if they're turning away from Trump, are they turning toward Democrats? What's happening here?
Well, I think you have to break up the, who you're talking about. I was at dinner last night, Easter dinner with friends, and these are Washington people, highly, not political people, but people in Washington who read the papers and are passionately political, and they were apoplectic at the failure of Democrats to push back, to fight, to protest. And you hear that everywhere. Folks who are dyed-in-the-wool Democratic partisans are beside themselves that the Democrats don't have a message, that they don't seem to be standing up. And I think that's probably true. They don't have really a good message. But it's largely because we're not in the middle of an election, right? We don't have a presidential candidate. And the Democrats have no power, right? They have some states, they can put out press releases, but they have no leverage, no piece of the government that they can use to leverage to get their message out and to demand anything from Trump. So the Democrats are in a bad position. Now, if you look at Virginia and New Jersey, where you have some gubernatorial primaries, and even Georgia, where you have John Ossoff's campaign beginning to come out, you can see messages, you can see some fight, you can see some blistering rhetoric, but people aren't seeing that at the national level. And I'm not sure how the Democrats can manage to do that.
Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I largely agree. I mean, I just don't think it's not realistic to expect there's going to be a singular Democratic leader with the perfect message to lead the troops into the fight at this stage of the game. The Congress is not constructed that way. You have a House Minority Leader, you have a Senate Minority Leader, you have caucuses that are ideologically and geographically diverse. They have to worry about not just keeping the base excited, but keeping swing state members protected. So you're going to have diversity of message. It's going to be kind of awkward and bulky at times, and there's going to be grinding of teeth because of it. To look at the polling of Democratic Party favorability right now, it's terrible. So you might look at that and say they're blowing this opportunity. But what we saw at the ballot box in the specials most recently, it says the opposite. You don't necessarily have to have fantastic favorability when you're the opposition, because when you get to the midterm, it's going to be a referendum on those who are in power. And maybe we're very early in the. I mean, where it would be concerning is if Democrats were so demoralized that they couldn't recruit halfway decent candidates to run in the midterms, and then you'd blow that opportunity. And it's too early to even have a lot of announced candidates. But we do have a bunch of announced candidates in the Michigan Senate primary who are all reputable people. You don't see people if they're taking a pass on that race, it's because they want to run for president, not because they're scared that they're going to lose in 2026. So I don't have a great sense that Democrats are going to have a problem on the recruitment front. And part of the way it inherently works is that primary process is going to show who's got the stronger messaging and who's tapping into the nerves and who isn't. And it's just going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, I completely agree with Bill. And just to be clear, I think people are not panicked about the Democrats' inability to win races in 2 years or 4 years. They're panicked about the country being taken into authoritarianism and the Democrats not standing up and fighting to keep that from happening. I mean, they also worry about future electoral. But I'm hearing people say, a wealthy donor told me the other day, I'm not giving to any candidates because I put all that money in 2024. It didn't do any good. I'm giving to other things. People are, there's existential dread about where the country is. And, I don't know how the Democrats have a message to deal with that when they don't have any power to do very much about it.
Well, in terms
Yeah.
of just stopping authoritarianism, I mean, I can't draw a direct line between these two events, but Chris Van Hollen going to El Salvador and drawing attention to Garcia's wrongful incarceration, when there are a smattering of voices saying this is, Gavin Newsom saying this is a distraction, we focus on the tariffs, and a couple of anonymous House Democrats saying something similar to Axios. Chris Van Hollen said, no, I'm going to draw attention to this. And that prodded, I think, Hakeem Jeffries to say similar things, because the media's not asking, what do you have to say about this? It would be considered kind of immoral to treat Garcia like it's impolitic to help you when you are a human being who has been separated from his family through an authoritarian abduction. And after that, the Supreme Court said, hey, don't do that again. We saw initially with the Supreme Court a little bit of a hesitation to fast track us to constitutional crisis by, standing down the lower court order on bringing back Garcia from facilitate and effectuate to just facilitate. And so we were kind of wondering, is the Supreme Court going to go hard here? Are they really going to draw a firm line here? And maybe, again, this is where it's speculative, maybe if Democrats were taking a dive on this, saying, you know what, this is not our thing. Let's signal to the country that this is not that important. It might be easier for the Supreme Court to say, we're going to keep slow walking this because the public's not really on our case about it. Right. And they didn't do it that time. So I credit Van Hollen and other Democrats for keeping the spotlight on this. And even though they don't have literal power, they don't have direct power to stop it, they're using their bully pulpits where they can.
Mm-hmm. Let me give you an example from the past, and you may remember this one, of how a minority can make life miserable for the majority. Do you remember in the mid-aughts, during George W. Bush's administration, when terrorism was the coin of the realm, Chuck Schumer found out through his sources that an Arab, Gulf state government was going to purchase one of the ports on the East Coast.
Oh, right. CFIUS.
Yes. And he went out every day and did news conferences, right? He was in the minority. He was the minority leader of the Senate. And just every day saying, George W. Bush's administration is putting us at risk by selling our ports to the, to companies that may have some connection to terrorism. And, some of the mainstream, serious people were like, well, that's really a terrible thing to say. That's kind of racist and blah. But it really rallied Democrats and became a thorn in the side of the Bush administration. It didn't necessarily change the world, but that's at that point, you'll recall, Schumer was kind of a hero to the same Democrats now who are furious at him for not having, shut down the government a couple of weeks ago.
Right. Bill, back to your point very briefly about Van Hollen, you actually wrote a column about this, last week, where you were making the point that sometimes you have to do the right thing regardless of the politics, and perhaps the politics will follow.
But I think this is going to be one of those cases. I mean, I can't, totally predict the future, but I think number one, we should be doing everything we can to bring Garcia back to his family because it's the right thing to do. It's a human being, and it's hard to do the right thing all the time. The world's complicated. Awful things happen all over the world. We can't start a war every place where a bad thing is occurring. But here is an example where the federal government is doing something that's directly antithetical to the reason America was founded in the Constitution.
And that it admits was a mistake.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. But they're saying it doesn't matter because they don't want to set the precedent that they have to fix it. They want the Trump administration wants the power to take who they want to take and send to El Salvador no matter what. So admitting error and mainly have to fix it takes that power away from them. This is a direct threat. This is like a dead center attack on the Constitution.
Mhm.
You have to stand up to that, whatever the politics are. But then go to the political analysis. The argument is, well, polls show that people like deportations. And they believe that people here illegally who are criminals should be sent back to their home countries. Okay. How does that apply to Garcia? Garcia maybe came here illegally as a teenager, but more recently got a legal status from a judge that not only says that you're legally allowed to work here, you can get a work permit. You can be deported, but not to El Salvador.
Mhm.
They cannot send you to El Salvador because you have a genuine threat of persecution in El Salvador. And that was totally ignored in this case. So why would someone's general view that I think Donald Trump should be allowed to take people who have criminal records back to their home countries, how does that apply to Garcia? It doesn't.
Mhm.
So why should I make a political judgment based on a poll situation? I mean, you might say, well, it's going to be hard to explain the details of the case are going to be difficult. Maybe, but except that the main part of the story, the Trump administration admits this was a mistake, is in every story. It's not a hidden part of the weeds of the story. We all know the basic elements of it. And Paul and I have talked about this before. I wrote about it previously. Trump administration, when they were separating families in 2018, the polls swung because people didn't want to see kids separated from their families.
Right.
Polls can move. I mean, you don't do this for polls. We're probably not going to talk about this in 2026. It'll probably be about the tariffs. And if you're worried about drawing attention away from that, it's real simple. Donald Trump ran to lower your prices, and yet he's raising your prices and abducting legal people and sending them in foreign prisons instead of fixing your cost of living. 2 sentences, 3 sentences. It's not that complicated.
Right. Well, the Trump administration has been very strategic about its targets, right? So they're picking on undocumented people, and they're also picking on elite institutions like Harvard. So very briefly, I want to get your reaction on how that's playing out. Harvard has decided to fight. They're suing the Trump administration, and Trump, in the same way that it did with China, retaliated in kind and then some by threatening international students, cutting out funding, et cetera, et cetera. How do you see the politics of that fight playing out? Is Harvard even less popular than migrants?
I mean, if he really were targeted, right? That's how you succeed. You pick a few key examples and you beat them, and that sends a message to others: you better comply. The administration has not been targeted, right? First, it went after Columbia, then it went after Harvard, then it went after 60 different schools, some of them state universities in red states, like the University of Tennessee, right? And it didn't just go after, the U.S. USAID, foreign aid, which polls say people don't care about, and it's gone after the Social Security Administration and funding for cancer research. It's just all over the map. So not only are they fighting a war on multiple fronts, which is always bad war strategy, but they are at risk of uniting their enemies, right? So now you see more and more colleges saying, we need to work together. If we don't hang together, as as Franklin said, we're going to hang separately. And so you see the Big Ten trying to pull together as a unit to say an attack on one is an attack on all. Given time, you can imagine the Trump administration, with a little help here and there from the Supreme Court and lower courts, finding that it is advanced too far toward Moscow and having to retreat with its soldiers being picked off. So Early to tell, but again, I do feel a tipping point here.
And I would just add that, I wouldn't necessarily recommend Democrats die on the hill of Harvard or die on the hill of, Paul Weiss. These aren't necessarily institutions that are as beloved by the average American. They might well say these are people who have plenty of resources on their own. They can fight their own battles, which is true. And which is why, Harvard's doing the right thing in defending itself and setting a tone to make it harder for other higher education institutions to take a dive. And someone told me, if Harvard took a dive, they'd all take a dive. Harvard has the most capacity to fight this, and they are, and they should. And hopefully more and more law firms, a good number of law firms have already, kissed the ring, but a few aren't, and maybe they can start rallying their troops. Let them do that. Democrats don't have to be the tip of that spear. But I do think Democrats will be in a position to say, when you're getting close to election day and you're sort of tying it all together, how are Donald Trump and the Republicans spending their time in power? Exacting retribution on their enemies and not helping you. Mm-hmm. You may not like Harvard, but how does penalizing Harvard help you go into the grocery store? It didn't. That's where, these things, they might pull favorably to Trump in a vacuum, but you got to think about the bigger picture. Again, if the economy starts working out in a year, then it's a different story. But that's not where we are today.
Right. So in the few minutes we have remaining, I want to ask you guys each if there's something that happened last week that should have got more attention but didn't.
Well, it got some attention, but it deserves more, and that is a federal judge ruled that Google broke the law by monopolizing the digital ad technology world. This is a very big deal for democracy and the free press, because you can't really have a free press that doesn't have resources to do the digging and to get their word out, and to inform the public and suggest solutions and so forth. And the press has been in a tailspin because Google primarily, but some other major social media companies have hoovered up virtually all the digital advertising. So if we're going to have to see how the remedies go with this Google suit, but you can see very possibly Google having to sell off its monopoly on ad tech, break the company up. There was another judgment against them recently. So if you start to see that, if you see that happen, suddenly the world of the plummeting nature of our news world could turn around, and that could be long term a major change. And I just want to put a plug in for our colleague Phil Longman, who in the winter of in the late fall of 2020 was the first journalist to say, hey, this collapse of the media, it's based on a loss of digital advertising. It's Google's fault. The solution is an antitrust case against Google. He was the first to say that, and now it's actually happened.
Bill, how about you?
I'm such a broken record on this. It's always budget reconciliation for me. It just keeps being below the radar. It keeps not being what everyone's focused on, but we're still seeing Republicans not able to get on the same page with it, and it's kind of a big deal. Are they gonna gut Medicaid or not? Are they going to pass these tax cuts or not? They keep kicking the can down the road, and and the tax cuts are really important to Donald Trump because he wants to offset the pinch of the tariffs, even though the tax cuts being proposed probably wouldn't even succeed in doing that. Unless, of course, he eases back on the tariffs. So all that's still up in the air. And again, talking about his power, he's not really been able to dictate the terms of this package so far. There's still time left on the clock, but right now they still seem to be in disarray.
Yep.
Yeah, and I
Yep.
want to go back to something you brought up at the beginning, Anne, and that is this situation with the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Right before we came on the show today, the president put out on Truth Social that he has, absolutely has confidence in the Secretary of Defense.
Yeah. I
You
saw
know,
that.
this is holding on to a guy who in any other administration never would have been Secretary of Defense, but has no supporters anywhere in the Pentagon, in Congress.
Right.
This is a guy who is swirling down into the void, and the president's holding on to him. And to show confidence in somebody who's incompetent and a danger to national security does not endear you to the American people. I'm sure his base wants him to do this, but for the average person, especially if anything goes wrong, right? The acid test here is if we have an incident in which, service members are killed or something goes wrong, whether it's Pete Hegseth's fault or not, it's going to be blamed on him, and that blame's going to hit Donald Trump. And you can see it happening. We will see.
Right. No, I think it's a good point. And I was thinking when all this was happening too about the fact that we don't currently have a national security crisis on our hands. But just a couple of weeks ago, we interviewed Christian Carl, who wrote for the Monthly about China, Taiwan, and a potential attack on Guam.
Right.
If I were China, having a leaderless Pentagon might be an ideal time to make a move somewhere in the world. And thank goodness that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, or Russia, right? I mean,
Or Russia.
Yeah, literally the Secretary of Defense fired who has no experience running anything larger than a TV news show. He's a combat veteran, but he has no management experience, certainly at the highest levels of the Pentagon. Fired everybody who was, his second, third, fourth, fifth in command. It is total chaos over there. Very dangerous.
I mean, they have sold their immigration agenda as a counterterrorism operation, and they're deploying military resources for it. If there was a terrorist attack on American soil, with all the incompetence and all the chaos going on, it would be utterly fatal to everything that they are trying to accomplish, and it's mind-boggling why they would take such risks with it. Because they just don't take governmental competence seriously, and we know in history that you don't take care of some of the blocking and tackling of government,
right.
It can really burn you extremely badly.
Yeah, it's the incompetence and recklessness and arrogance of this administration is breathtaking, and I think we're seeing that.
And we're not even in the first 100 days. The reckoning has not begun to happen, and so time will tell. But you can't shake up this many systems with this level of disorder and disregard and expect nothing's going to go wrong. It's going to go wrong.
Well, on that cheery note, thank you guys for joining this morning. I am Washington Monthly contributing editor Ann Kim, and I was joined today by Washington Monthly editor-in-chief Paul Glastris and politics editor Bill Scher. Hope you will join us next week, and do not forget to share, like, and subscribe. Take care, everyone.